My family insists that I hand over the house I bought on my own to my pregnant sister because she needs it more. My mother likes to tell people she did her best with me, like I was some kind of failed project she had to return to the store. She says it in that fake, sad voice, hand on her chest like she is hurt and confused about how her oldest daughter turned out so ungrateful and distant. She leaves out the part where she shoved a trash bag of my clothes into my arms when I was 16 and told me to get out of her house because I was dating the wrong kind of boy and making the family look bad in front of the community. I still remember the smell of the hallway carpet that night. It was this weird mix of cleaning product, old dust, and something burnt from the kitchen downstairs. And I was standing there with my shoes half on, hugging that bag like it was going to steady me, while my mother kept talking about shame and reputation and the neighbors. She talked like there was an audience somewhere rating her performance as a strict but righteous mother. She did not ask where I was going. She did not ask if I had money or if I was scared. She just kept saying that I brought this on myself and that I knew what kind of people our community would tolerate. The boy she hated so much was just a kid from my high school who happened to have a different accent and a different last name. We tried to keep talking for a while after I got kicked out, meeting up near school and texting when we could, but my whole life turned into survival mode, and eventually the distance and pressure were too much. We drifted apart quietly, without a big breakup scene, just fewer messages until there were none. He was polite, soft-spoken, always said thank you to adults, and probably the safest thing in my life at the time. He walked me home when it was dark, waited with me for the bus, sent me dumb little photos of his dog when I was stressed about exams. None of that mattered. What mattered was that people had seen us holding hands in the parking lot after a church youth event, and apparently that was enough to burn my whole childhood down. When my mother opened the door and told me to get out, my little sister was standing halfway down the hallway, peeking from behind her bedroom door. She did not say anything. Her eyes were big, and she looked more curious than scared, like she was watching a show. My mother told her to close her door and not come out. She did. I remember thinking even then that I was being written out of the family story in real time, and my sister was being taught that this was normal. I called a friend from school while I stood on the sidewalk with my trash bag and my backpack and my heart beating way too fast. It was late, but she answered on the second ring. Her mother let me sleep on their couch for what was supposed to be a couple of nights and turned into months. I learned how to fold blankets in the morning so the living room would look like a living room again and not like someone lived there. I learned how to make myself small in someone else's house, how to move quietly, how to be grateful without looking like I was keeping score. A school counselor pulled me aside after a week and asked gentle questions about where I was staying and if I felt safe and if I knew about child protection services. She had this soft voice and a folder open in front of her, and she kept saying my name like it could soften the situation. I nodded, said I was fine, smiled way too wide, and lied through my teeth, because the idea of getting dropped into a home with strangers terrified me more than my mother did. I had already been thrown out once. I was not about to volunteer to be moved around like a piece of furniture again. That was the first time I realized that in my family, love was conditional and reputation was everything. As long as you kept the picture-perfect story going, you were a good daughter. You smiled in photos, you sat in the front row at church, you laughed at the right jokes. The second you embarrassed them, you were disposable. I got my first job at a coffee shop when I was 17, mostly because I felt guilty eating my friends' groceries and using their hot water. I was still going to classes, dragging myself out of bed before sunrise to catch 2 buses, and then spending evenings wiping tables and pretending to be cheerful for customers who snapped their fingers when their drinks took too long. I smelled like espresso, sugar syrup, and cleaning chemicals all the time. I knew exactly how long it took for the mop water to go from clear to gray. There were nights I would get home and just sit in the shower until the hot water ran out, because it was the only place I felt completely alone and off-duty. There were nights when my feet ached so badly I would stand at the bus stop and seriously consider just lying down on the bench and staying there. I learned the regulars by their shoes and their orders before I ever knew their names. The man who always complained his drink was too hot but kept coming back. The woman who tipped in coins and sticky dollar bills and apologized every single time. The teenage kids who treated the place like their living room and left napkins everywhere. I got yelled at for things I could not control, like prices and wait times, and then went home to sleep on a couch that was not mine and worry that one day the friend who was helping me would finally get tired of the extra person in her living room. On the bus rides home, I would stare out the window at other people's houses and wonder what it felt like to be inside them without clenching your teeth. I kept my work shoes under the couch and my uniforms folded in a plastic bin because I never wanted to be accused of taking up too much space. On my days off, when other people my age were going to parties or hanging out at the mall, I was catching up on laundry, trying to keep up with homework, and doing mental math about whether I could afford a bigger bag of rice that week. It was not heroic. It was just grinding through each day because the alternative was going back to a house where I was not wanted. My body responded to the stress in weird ways. Some weeks I could not eat much because my stomach was in knots, and other weeks I would inhale whatever was left over at the end of a shift like I had not seen food in days. I remember my friend's mother leaving a plate of food on the coffee table when she went to bed, just in case you get hungry later, and me staring at it like it was some kind of exam about whether I was allowed to exist there. By the time I turned 18, I could finally sign a lease without needing anyone's signature, which felt like winning a tiny war. I moved into this cramped apartment with 2 other girls who were going through their own messes. One would pay her part of the rent late so often that the landlord knew her voice on the phone and sighed before she even said her name. The other treated the place like some kind of party venue every weekend. There were empty bottles on the counter, random shoes in the hallway, people sleeping on the couch when I had to get ready for work. Sometimes I would wake up to the smell of smoke and panic before realizing it was just someone burning toast at 3 in the morning. It was chaotic and not even close to ideal, but it was mine. Or at least as close to mine as something shared with strangers could be. No one could throw me out alone in the hallway and shut the door behind me. If I left, it would be because I chose to. I enrolled in a certification program at a community college and tried to convince myself that exhaustion was a personality trait. I would close the coffee shop at night, count the drawer, clean the machines, and then catch a few hours of sleep before opening it again in the morning with my eyes half open. I ate whatever I could grab between classes, usually something cheap, and my body started showing signs that this was not sustainable. I fainted at work once. One second I was refilling the pastry case. The next I was on the floor with my manager yelling my name and a regular customer fanning me with a menu. I wish I could say that was the moment I slowed down and learned to take care of myself, but it was not. I took a day off, drank some sports drinks, promised everyone I would take it easy, and then went right back. When you grow up being told that you are a problem, you start treating basic survival like something you have to earn every single day. The thing that kept me going was this stubborn little fantasy of having a place that no one could throw me out of. Not a rented room, not a shared apartment where someone else's boyfriend would leave his laundry all over the living room and complain about the noise of your alarm, but an actual place that was legally mine. I started building credit with a secured card, which I used only for gas and paid off obsessively. I read boring articles about budgeting and savings between classes when everyone else was scrolling through silly videos. I skipped nights out, said no to trips, and watched every dollar like it was a living thing that could run away if I looked away too long. There were nights when the apartment was loud and full of people, and I would put on headphones without music just to muffle the sounds and stare at photos of little houses online. I would zoom in on the chipped paint and weird carpets in the listing photos and imagine what it would feel like to walk through a door and know that even if I messed up, even if I made someone mad, the place would still be mine the next day. By my early 20s, after what felt like forever, I got a job in an office. It was not glamorous. I was filing, answering phones, sending emails, dealing with people who thought their printer problem was the end of the world. I sat in one of those chairs that looks comfortable at first, and then slowly kills your back over the course of a day. But it came with a salary that did not depend on tips, and there were actual benefits. I printed the offer letter and stared at it like it was a golden ticket. It meant a little bit of stability, and stability was something I had only ever seen from a distance. The actual work was not glamorous. I spent a lot of time squinting at spreadsheets under buzzing lights, answering emails that could have been 1 sentence instead of 5, and pretending the free coffee in the break room did not taste like burnt cardboard. I learned which coworkers would cover for me if a bus ran late and which ones would absolutely not, who microwaved fish at lunch like a war crime, and who always had extra painkillers in their desk drawer. On good days, I could almost forget that I did not have a real family safety net. On bad days, I would catch my reflection in the dark computer screen and think, okay, at least I have a paycheck and a place to be that is not someone's couch. My name is Talia, by the way. I probably should have mentioned that earlier, but when your family has spent years acting like you are a cautionary tale instead of a daughter, your own name starts to feel like something you have to sneak into the story later. It does not feel like a given. It feels like a detail you have to earn the right to say out loud. Talia, the girl who saved every extra dollar. Talia, who said no when coworkers wanted to order takeout and quietly microwave leftovers instead, while they laughed about how disciplined she was. Talia, who kept a spreadsheet of her savings and a folder of listings for tiny houses in areas no one in my old community would ever care about. I knew which rural counties had lower property taxes, which ones had programs to help first-time buyers, and which ones were far enough away that my mother would never accidentally show up. Around 25, I found the cabin in one of those late-night rabbit hole searches. It was in a rural county I had never heard of, near a small lake I had to zoom in on a map to even see. The listing pictures were not exactly inspiring. The place looked tired, with peeling paint, an old deck with missing boards, and a roof that clearly needed help. The yard was more weeds than grass. The inside had wood paneling in some rooms that made it look like a time capsule. The price, though, made me sit up. It was labeled as a fixer-upper, which is real estate code for, "This house has seen some things." But it was actually within reach if I stacked every bit of savings I had and squeezed a little more. The first time I drove out to see it in person, I almost turned around twice. The road out of town narrowed faster than I expected, and my little car complained the whole way up a long hill that looked steeper in real life than it had on the map. My cell signal dropped to one lonely bar, and then nothing. And for a few minutes, all I could hear was the engine, the tires on gravel, and my own brain asking if I had finally lost it. But then the trees opened up just enough to see the water through the branches, dark and still, and completely indifferent to whether I belonged there or not. It felt terrifying and peaceful at the same time, like walking into a room where nobody knew my name and nobody expected anything from me. There were perks I did not understand at first, like a rural development program that meant I did not need as much money up front because the area was considered underdeveloped. The loan officer explained it in the slow, careful voice people use when they think you might run away if numbers get too big. I nodded and asked as many questions as I could without sounding dumb. I brought a notebook and wrote down terms so I could look them up later. I signed papers, proved that I really did have a long, boring history of paying on time, and waited for someone to tell me that it had all been a mistake. The day of the closing, a few months before my 26th birthday, I sat at a table with a stack of forms that felt taller than my whole life, and signed my name so many times my hand cramped. I kept expecting someone to burst into the room and say there had been a glitch, that the computer system caught up and realized girls like me were not allowed to own lake cabins. No one did. At the end of it, someone slid a small metal key across the table and said, "Congratulations." I stared at the key for a second, half convinced if I blinked it would vanish. I drove out there alone in my car with the heater blasting and some random playlist humming in the background. The road turned from highway to smaller road to a narrow 2-lane stretch that wound around trees and past faded mailboxes with peeling numbers. There were houses scattered here and there, some neat, some falling apart, some with kids' toys in the yards, some with old cars parked out front. I pulled into the little gravel driveway, turned off my car, and just sat there staring at the cabin. The paint was worse in person. The porch sagged a little more than it had in the photos. The yard was mostly weeds and patches of stubborn grass. I could see where someone had started a project and given up halfway. I loved it instantly in this irrational way, like the way you love a stray animal before you even touch it. Inside, it smelled like dust and old wood, with just a hint of something mildew-flavored in the bathroom. Sun came through the windows in weird slices because the blinds were crooked. The kitchen had mismatched cabinets and a counter with a burn mark shaped like someone had dropped a hot pan and walked away. I sat down on the floor right in the middle of the empty living room. The wood was cold and hard, and for some reason that made me cry even harder. I cried for the girl who had slept on a couch in someone else's house, for the teenager who had stood in the hallway with a trash bag, for every version of me who had decided that being tired and broke was better than begging my way back home. This was mine, imperfect, worn out, in need of more love than I knew how to give, but mine. The first few visits were not some dreamy montage. By the way, the first time I tried to spend the night there, the heater made a noise like it was chewing gravel. The pipes banged so loud I thought someone was knocking on the walls. And a spider the size of my palm decided to introduce itself in the bathroom. I sat on an air mattress in the middle of the empty living room with 3 pairs of socks on, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like storage, eating instant noodles out of a plastic bowl, and wondering if I had completely lost my mind. The next morning, a neighbor I had only seen from a distance walked over while I was standing in the driveway staring at the sagging porch. He was older, with a ball cap and the kind of deep tan people get from actually working outside, not from lying near a pool. He pointed at the steps and said, in the most casual way possible, that if I kept walking up and down them the way they were, I was going to end up on the ground with a twisted ankle. Then he shrugged and said he had some extra lumber if I wanted to reinforce it, and that I could borrow his drill as long as I did not sue him if I hurt myself. We were not friends or anything, but that tiny bit of neighbor energy went a long way. I was so used to people looking at me like I was a problem to be solved or a cautionary tale that having someone treat me like a normal person with a slightly pathetic porch felt bizarrely kind. I learned how to change a light fixture from a video on my phone, how to tape off a wall so paint would not bleed all over the trim, how to clear leaves out of the gutters without falling off the ladder. None of it was glamorous. My back hurt, my hands were always dry from scrubbing something, and I went to my office job on Mondays with paint smudges on my wrists more often than I want to admit. I started fixing things slowly. On weekends, I drove out with a trunk full of tools I barely knew how to use and watched endless tutorial videos until I felt brave enough to try. I painted walls, cleaned floors, replaced cabinet handles, and figured out which breaker controlled which part of the house after tripping the wrong one more than once. I patched the deck with help from a kind neighbor who introduced himself simply as the guy down the road and did not ask questions when I clearly did not want to explain my whole life. He showed me how to reinforce a wobbly railing and how to check under the house for leaks without panicking at every spider. The cabin slowly started looking less like a forgotten project and more like a real home. I bought secondhand furniture piece by piece. A couch with a small tear in the back that no one would see, a table with scratches that I covered with a runner, dishes that did not match but felt fine in my hands. I put a thin rug down in the living room so I would not feel the cold of the floor quite as much. The first night I slept there alone, with the windows cracked just enough to hear the lake water and the occasional owl. I felt a kind of peace I had never felt in my mother's house. While I was building this quiet little life around the lake, my family was living an entirely different story without me. My younger sister still lived with my mother. She had always been the favorite, the one who got second chances and gentle words where I got lectures and side comments about my attitude. When she got pregnant during her second year of college, I braced myself for an explosion. I thought my mother would yell and throw things and talk about shame, just like she had with me. Instead, she opened her arms and told my sister that everyone makes mistakes, and that the important thing was to move forward as a family. Apparently, the difference between sin and mistake in my family had less to do with what you actually did, and more to do with how much my mother liked you at baseline. My sister moved back into my mother's house with her unemployed boyfriend, who spent his days sinking into the couch with a game controller in his hands and an open snack bag on the table. My mother talked about how the poor guy just needed time to find himself, how he would step up when the baby came, how my sister deserved support. The same woman who had told me I was an adult at 16 and could figure things out on my own was now making late-night snacks for her pregnant baby and her grown man guest. I tried to stay in touch with my sister, at least at first. We would talk on the phone every few weeks. She would complain about little things like how my mother made comments about her clothes or how the boyfriend never washed his own dishes. Sometimes when she forgot to filter herself, she would repeat things my mother said about me, and I would hear lines I recognized. Selfish, dramatic, disrespectful, ungrateful. She did not even realize she was parroting our mother word for word. It was just the water she had always swum in. She would ask about the cabin in this casual voice that did not quite match the way she lingered on the word mine. She would say things like, "It must be nice to have somewhere to escape to," and "You are so lucky you do not have to worry about rent," and laugh like it was a joke. I would explain that there was still a mortgage, still insurance, still repairs, still work. I do not think she really heard me. In her mind, the cabin was some kind of magic prize I had stumbled into, not the end result of years of grinding. I kept my life simple. Work in the city during the week, cabin on the weekends. I was still splitting a tiny, cheap apartment in the city with roommates and treated the cabin as my weekend place while I slowly fixed it up. I repaired what I could afford to repair and ignored what I could not. I learned how to live with things that were not perfect. There was one night that first winter when the pipes froze and I sat on the floor in 3 sweaters, wondering if I had made a huge mistake, and if it would have been easier to just stay small and obedient forever. A slightly crooked door, a squeaky step, a patch of wall that needed more sanding than I had the energy for. I also learned how to love something that no one had handed to me, something I had built slowly and stubbornly out of all the parts of myself my family had not managed to crush. Then one Sunday morning, while I was sitting on the small deck with a mug of coffee and a blanket around my shoulders, my phone rang. It was my mother. She did not call often, which meant it was either a holiday or a crisis. It was neither. It was worse. She started with small talk, asking if I was still at that job, if my car was holding up, if the winters by the lake were cold. She sounded almost friendly, and it put me on edge immediately. She is not friendly with me without a reason. Then she said that my sister had finally decided to get married. She put this cheap excitement into her voice, like she was trying to sell me something on a commercial. I said, "Congratulations." I meant it, sort of. I have my opinions about marrying the guy who has been living rent-free in your mother's house while refusing to look for steady work. But whatever. Not my life. Not my baby. Not my problem. Then my mother said it. She said she had the perfect idea for a wedding gift. She thought I should give my cabin to my sister as a present. I actually laughed at first because I thought she was making some kind of weird joke. Who asks their estranged daughter to hand over the one stable thing she owns as a wedding gift to the golden child and her man-child partner? I asked her to repeat herself, just to make sure I had heard right, and she did. Slower, as if maybe I did not understand words properly or had missed the part where this was somehow reasonable. She talked about how a baby needs a yard and fresh air, and how the cabin would be a perfect place for my sister to raise a family. She painted this whole picture of a toddler running through the grass, a grill on the deck, little shoes by the door. She said things like, "You are single? You do not really need all that space." And, "It is not like you are there full time." And, "Families should help each other." She mentioned the way people would talk if they found out I refused to help my own sister when I was doing so well, like my entire purpose was to be a public relations project for her. My hands were shaking. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat and this buzzing in my ears like a bad soundtrack. I told her no. Not maybe, not let me think about it, just no. I told her I had worked too hard for too long to give up the one thing that felt like mine. I told her if she wanted to give my sister a house so badly, she could buy one or co-sign a loan. She did not like that answer. She called me selfish. She said I was letting pride get in the way of family. She said my sister had been through so much and deserved support. When I reminded her that I had been through things too, like being thrown out as a teenager with no plan and no safety net, she snorted. She said it was different with me because I had brought it on myself by refusing to listen. I hung up before I said something I could not take back, even though honestly, I think that line had been crossed years ago. For a few hours, I paced around the cabin, writing and deleting long messages on my phone. I wanted to send my sister a detailed breakdown of everything, from the night I was kicked out to every shift I had worked half asleep to every time I had said no to something fun so I could pay a bill. I wanted to list every reason why asking for my house was insane. I typed out paragraph after paragraph and then erased them. I knew deep down it would not matter. She was used to being rescued. She did not understand what it meant to stand alone. It did not take long for the messages to start, though. My sister texted me asking if I had heard my mother's idea. She wrote like it was already decided, like I was just the paperwork person. When I said no, that I was not giving up my place, her tone flipped. Suddenly, I was cruel. I was abandoning family. I was making her pregnancy harder than it needed to be. She sent me photos of her belly, of small baby clothes, like props in some emotional argument I had not agreed to join. Her boyfriend chimed in from her phone at one point, talking about how real family shows up, as if I had not been showing up for my own life this whole time. He wrote that I was lucky, and that lucky people have a responsibility to share. I stared at those words and thought about all the nights I had cried in the shower so no one would hear me. If that was luck, it had a pretty dark sense of humor. I thought that was as bad as it would get. I was wrong. A few days later, I was wrapping up a long day at the office, gathering my bag and logging out of my computer, when I got a notification from the security app linked to my cabin. Motion detected. That was not unusual. Sometimes it was just a raccoon or a neighbor's dog wandering through. Sometimes it was wind or a branch. I opened the app almost out of habit and then froze. There, on my screen, was my sister. I wish I could say I was shocked she had managed to find the place, but I knew exactly how it had happened. My mother had seen the county and road name on a piece of mail once, and said it out loud at the table like it was a fun little detail. And my sister had a good memory when it came to anything she thought she might use later. She was standing on my front porch with her boyfriend, who had some kind of metal tool in his hand. They were right at my front door. He was trying to pry it open near the lock, leaning his weight into the handle, while my sister looked around like a kid caught sneaking out past curfew. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. My hands went cold and hot at the same time. I called the sheriff's office for that county with my hands shaking so hard I kept hitting the wrong numbers and had to erase and start again. I told them there were people trying to break into my property. The dispatcher asked if I knew them. I said yes, they were family, but that did not make it better. She said they would send someone, but it would take time because of how far out my place was. I stared at the video feed, helpless, listening to the line go quiet except for my own breathing. I wish I could tell you that part of me wanted to protect them, that I hesitated, that I felt guilty. I did not. All I felt was this hot, tight rage. My mother had raised me on this rule that family never calls the cops on family. Apparently, family did try to break into your house, though. So I broke her rule before they could actually break my door. The deputies showed up on the camera feed after what felt like hours, but was probably around 20 minutes. I watched their car pull up, watched my sister's face change when she realized what was happening. She grabbed her boyfriend's arm and hissed something at him, but it was too late. The deputies were already out of the car, already asking questions, already looking at the damaged door frame and the tool in his hand. They ended up arresting him for attempted burglary. They put handcuffs on him right there in my yard while my sister cried and tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. She told them she had a right to be there because this is my sister's place and we are supposed to live here anyway. The deputies asked if I wanted to press charges. I was not physically there, but they called me on speaker and asked. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but my voice came out steady when I said yes. They charged my sister too, as an accomplice. They did not haul her off in cuffs that night because of the pregnancy. They cited her on scene, filed her as a co-defendant, and gave her a date to appear in court. She looked straight into the camera once, and even though I knew she could not actually see me, I felt like she was staring right into my eyes. There was shock there, and anger, and something that looked a lot like betrayal, like I had broken some sacred rule by choosing myself. I turned off the feed and sat in my silent apartment staring at nothing. I knew what was coming next. I could feel it like a storm rolling in. My mother called the next day, and if I thought she had been cruel before, I was not prepared for this version of her. She did not even say hello. She went straight into screaming. According to her, I had ruined my sister's life, destroyed her future, traumatized her during pregnancy, and proved once and for all that I was heartless. I tried to explain that they had tried to break into my house, that they had damaged my door, that what happened was the result of their choices. She did not care. She kept repeating that she would never, ever forgive me for calling the police on my own family. She said that throwing me out when I was 16 had been the right decision, and that she wished she had done it sooner so I would not have infected my sister with my attitude. That line hit harder than the rest because it was not really new information. She had implied it in 100 little ways over the years. Hearing her say it out loud without shame made something finally snap inside me. I told her I was done. I told her if she called me again to yell, I would block her number. She laughed like she did not believe me. Like blocking her was not even an option in her world. She believed me later. My sister, whose court case was now looming over everything, did not handle the situation quietly. She took her campaign public. On this social media app, she started posting long emotional rants about how her pregnant self had been denied a safe home by her cold-hearted sister. She posted pictures of herself in cramped spaces with peeling paint, wrote about being forced to raise her baby in unsafe conditions because her greedy sister would not share. My phone did not let me ignore it even when I tried. Screenshots started landing in my messages before I had even seen the original post. A girl I had shared a locker with in 9th grade sent me a link with a, "Is this about you?" Like it was gossip, not my life. An aunt I had not seen since I was a kid texted me a praying hands emoji and a vague, "family should stick together" paragraph without asking once what had actually happened. Coworkers who barely spoke to me at the office suddenly had a lot to say in private messages, all of it shaped like concern but angled like judgment. It was like watching a version of myself I did not recognize getting passed around in group chats I was not in. She left out the part where her boyfriend was caught on camera trying to break in. She left out the part where I had offered to help her find a rental and maybe help with a deposit, but made it clear the cabin was not available as a gift. She left out the part where she had called me selfish for saying no. At first, the post just made me roll my eyes and cringe. My phone lit up with notifications from people I had not talked to in years sending me screenshots with messages like, "Is everything okay?" and "Is this about you?" Then she posted a picture of the outside of my cabin. The angle was weird enough that she probably thought it was anonymous, but local people could definitely figure it out. In the caption, she talked about, "This place near the lake. Everyone knows that cute little cabin near the bend in the road," and my stomach twisted. A coworker messaged me a screenshot one afternoon and asked if I was okay. That was how I found out people in my actual life had seen it. She did not know the full story. She just wrote, "I am not trying to be nosy, but this looks really personal." I stared at the message, feeling exposed in this new way. Like my family chaos had somehow leaked into my work life and was now dripping all over my professional reputation. That was the moment I realized this was not just about hurt feelings or awkward holidays. My safety and privacy were actually on the line. I found a lawyer. I sat in a small office with framed diplomas on the wall and told the whole story to a stranger in a blazer. I talked about being kicked out as a teenager, building a life on my own, buying the cabin, the phone call about the wedding gift, the break-in, the arrest, the posts. I felt ridiculous at first, like I was being dramatic, but the lawyer did not laugh. He took notes and asked specific questions, like dates and times, and exactly what the deputies had written in their report. Every time he said, "That matters," I felt both validated and sick. He suggested we request a restraining order, not just because of the break-in, but because of the harassment and the way my sister had started involving other people. He used words like pattern and escalation that made my skin crawl because they made everything sound clinical and real. He told me to screenshot everything, every post, every comment, every text message. He said that if she deleted things later, the screenshots would still count as evidence. We filed for a temporary order first. The judge granted it, which meant my sister and her boyfriend were told they could not contact me directly, show up where I lived or worked, or use my name or location online to harass me. They broke that rule almost immediately because of course they did. Every time they did, my lawyer saved the screenshots and added another violation to the file. The papers were just new props in the drama for them, not a boundary. Some of the worst posts came down after they were served, but by then, screenshots were circulating in local groups. People love drama, especially family drama, and this had everything. Pregnancy, a lakeside cabin, police, accusations of greed. The wild part was how many people were willing to believe my sister's version, where I was this cold, successful villain hoarding a lakeside paradise while a poor pregnant woman begged for help. I tried, just once, to set the record straight publicly. I wrote a long post where I explained that my cabin was not a luxury retreat, that I had worked for years to buy it, that my sister and her boyfriend had tried to force their way in. I included still frames from the security footage showing them with the tool at the door, blurred just enough that strangers could not clearly make out their faces, but clear enough that it was obvious what was happening. I did not show the exact location. I did not use their names. The reaction was messy, which honestly should not have surprised me. Some people commented saying that they understood, that boundaries were important, that calling the police had been the right thing. Others wrote that I should have kept it private, that airing dirty laundry online was tacky, that I was humiliating my sister while she was vulnerable. A few insisted there had to be another side, and that surely I could have found a way to compromise. My phone buzzed nonstop for 2 days. I muted everything, turned off notifications, and still felt like there was a swarm of bees living in my chest, buzzing and stinging at random moments. Then my mother showed up. Not on the app, in real life. I was at the cabin on a Saturday, patching a part of the roof with that same neighbor who occasionally helped me, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I climbed down the ladder and wiped my hands on my jeans. My mother stepped out of the car holding a manila folder like it was a weapon, and she was here to win a fight. She did not waste time on pleasantries. No hug, no, "How are you?" Nothing. She walked right up to me and pulled out a stack of papers. She said she had talked to someone who knows about these things and found out there was a simple way to fix everything. She said it the way you might talk about a quick household hack, like cleaning a stain or organizing a closet. She wanted me to sign a form to transfer the cabin into my sister's name. She called it a temporary thing. She said it was just to make my sister feel secure while she got through the pregnancy and the court mess, and that we could sort it out later. She said things like, "It is just a piece of paper," and "It does not really change anything. You know the cabin will always be our family home. And if you really cared, you would do this without making a big deal out of it." I took the papers from her and pretended to look at them while my vision blurred. I recognized the form for what it was. It was not temporary. It was not symbolic. If I signed, I would be handing away my house with no guarantee of getting it back. My mother either did not understand that, or understood it perfectly, and did not care because in her head, everything I had was already community property as long as the community was spelled family. I took out my phone, snapped pictures of the forms, and handed them back. I told her I was not signing anything without my own lawyer looking at it. Her mouth tightened into that thin, angry line I remembered from childhood. She tried to guilt me, then tried to scare me, then tried to play on nostalgia, all in the span of a few minutes. She reminded me of how she had taken me in and fed me for years as a child, like that was not literally her job as a parent. When none of that worked, she called me cold again, said I had let the world harden me, said she did not recognize me anymore. I asked her to leave. I told her if she did not get back in her car, I would call the sheriff. She stared at me for a long second, like she wanted to see if I was bluffing, then turned on her heel, stuffed the papers back into the folder, and drove away, kicking up gravel behind her tires. You would think that would be the climax of the whole thing, but my family does not know how to leave well enough alone. A few weeks later, I got a call late at night from a number I recognized instinctively. My sister. I almost hit decline on reflex because of the restraining order, but curiosity and old habit won for a second. I answered and listened without saying my name. She was crying. Not the pretty single tear kind of crying. This was ugly, hiccuping sobs, the kind that make it hard to understand the words at first. She said the boyfriend had left. He had packed his stuff into bags, called her a burden, blamed her for his court problems, and walked out. She said he told her he was tired of waiting around for her rich sister to hand over the house. Like that had been the plan all along. I wish I could say I felt nothing. I did feel something. For just a moment, I felt this surge of pity, like I was talking to the kid version of her instead of the woman who had stood on my porch trying to break in. Then she kept talking. Between sobs, she told me that he had always believed the cabin would be theirs. My mother had promised it. She had told him months ago that I would hand it over eventually because I always felt guilty and never stuck to my boundaries. According to my sister, the whole break-in had been his idea, but the way she described it, my mother was the one who had planted the seed, telling them over and over that the place was as good as theirs already, that I owed it to them, that I would cave under pressure. Hearing that, something inside me rearranged. I had known my mother was pushing, but I had not realized she had gone that far, promising my house to people like she was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. My sister cried about how she had believed them, how she thought the cabin was already halfway hers, how she did not understand how everything had fallen apart. I told her she needed to find a job and talk to a lawyer about child support. I reminded her gently as I could manage considering I was shaking, that calling me was a violation of the order. I said I hoped she and the baby would be safe, and then I hung up. I sat there with the phone in my hand, staring at the wall, feeling like the ground under my life had shifted again, even though technically nothing new had happened. After that call, things escalated in a different way. It was like she discovered a new hobby, and that hobby was publicly repainting me as a villain. My phone lit up with screenshots people sent me of her posts before I ever saw them on my own feed. Old classmates I had not spoken to since high school popped up in my messages with, "Is this about you?" and little eye emojis like this was gossip and not my actual life. My aunt on my father's side, who never calls unless someone dies, left a voicemail saying she was praying for reconciliation without once asking what had actually happened. Everywhere I looked online, there was some half-true version of me floating around, and I felt like I was chasing smoke trying to correct it. My sister started showing up at places she knew I would be, because if she could not talk to me directly, she could at least create scenes. One morning, I walked into the small coffee shop near my office and found her already there, sitting at a table with her very pregnant belly prominently on display, and her phone propped up like she might start recording at any second. She looked up, locked eyes with me, and immediately burst into loud tears. She started talking loudly enough for everyone to hear, saying that I had abandoned her, that I had ruined her life, that I was hiding behind pieces of paper instead of being a real sister. People stared. One woman at the next table looked at me like I was some kind of monster. The barista froze behind the counter, unsure if she should keep making drinks. I did not engage. I walked out, got into my car, and sat there shaking, my hands gripping the steering wheel like I was about to drive into a hurricane. I should have called the police right then, but I froze and all I could think about was not giving her the public scene she clearly wanted. I called my lawyer later that day instead and told him every detail so he could add it as another violation. That same week, my manager called me into a meeting with someone from Human Resources. Apparently, my sister had emailed the office, claiming that I was harassing her and had turned the whole family against her. She framed it like a workplace issue, like it might spill into the building and the company had to be aware. She used words like unsafe and hostile to describe me, which would have been funny if it had not been such a direct shot at my job. I sat in that little office with the neutral-colored chairs and the box of tissues on the table, trying to explain that my family drama was exactly that, family drama, and that I was doing everything I could to keep it away from work. I mentioned the restraining order. I watched my manager's eyebrows go up at that. It did not look great on paper. People hear restraining order and think you are unstable or dangerous, not that you are trying to protect yourself from people who think your front door is optional. I forwarded them a copy of the order and the case number so security would know this was not some random office drama I had invented. They told me not to engage if anyone showed up asking for me, and to call the front desk or security immediately so they could handle it. They reassigned a big project I had been leading, just until things settled down. My income was not directly threatened in that moment, but my position, my reputation in the office, that intangible thing called professional trust, took a hit. Colleagues started treating me differently, like I was made of glass or explosives or something in between. After that meeting, the office did not feel like the same place I had walked into a year earlier. Conversations at the coffee station would stop half a beat too early when I walked up, like someone had hit pause on a show I was not allowed to watch. A coworker I barely knew asked in a faux soft voice if I was doing okay with everything, and I could tell from the way her eyes flicked to my badge that she already knew more details from my sister's post than from anything I had actually said. I started taking my lunch at my desk with my headphones in, even when there was no music playing, just so people would think twice before trying to turn my family mess into break room entertainment. By the time the court date for my sister and her ex finally rolled around, she had already had the baby a few weeks earlier and was pushing a stroller instead of a pregnant belly, and I was emotionally wrecked. There had been more messages, more posts, more sideways attacks through mutual acquaintances. I had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, replaying arguments in my head, wondering if I had somehow done something unforgivable that I just could not see clearly. I had talked about it in circles with a friend until both of us were sick of my own story. The hearing itself was painfully ordinary. No dramatic speeches, no gasps in the courtroom, just a tired judge looking over paperwork and listening to short statements. My sister got probation and was ordered to pay for the damage to my door and lock. The restraining order was extended for a longer period because of the repeated violations and the public scenes. Her ex had his own separate mess to deal with, mostly related to the break-in and some other things he had going on that did not involve me. The deputies we had met before were there, flipping through their notes, answering questions in calm voices. My mother sat in the second row and glared at me the whole time like I was the one on trial. When the judge spoke directly to me and asked if I had anything to add, my mouth went dry. I managed to say that I just wanted to feel safe in my own home and at my job, and that I did not expect my sister to agree with my choices. But I did expect her to respect my doors and my boundaries. My voice shook a little on the word safe, which annoyed me, but it also made it real. Afterward, there was this heavy, anticlimactic feeling. I had imagined some kind of emotional release when it was all done, but instead I just felt tired. My lawyer shook my hand. The deputies nodded at me on the way out. My sister avoided my eyes, focused on the baby stroller she was pushing like it needed her full concentration. My mother muttered something about how blood should matter more than houses, and walked away with her arm around my sister's shoulders. Life did not magically get better after that, but it did get quieter, at least in some ways. My sister had a healthy baby girl. I saw pictures floating around online, each one wrapped in captions about fresh starts and blessings, and how they were going to be just fine on their own. I did not hit like on any of them. I also did not report them. I just scrolled past. Sometimes I stopped for a second and looked at the baby's face, trying to see if there was any resemblance to me, to my mother, to the girl I used to share a room with. Then I would remember that the baby did not ask for any of this, and I would move on. My mother made some bad financial decisions trying to keep up with legal bills and support my sister's new little family. She refinanced her house, took on more debt than she could manage, and eventually lost the place when she fell behind. Someone mentioned to me through a mutual friend that she and my sister were now sharing a small rental apartment, pinching pennies, blaming me for all of it. In their version, I was the reason they were no longer in the big house, not the loans or the decisions or the break-in or any of the actual facts. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. If anything, I felt this weird mix of anger and grief and relief. It is not satisfying to watch people who hurt you struggle, no matter what the movies try to sell you. It just proves that everyone loses when a family implodes. The only difference is who gets blamed out loud and who gets blamed in silence. I kept my job. The work drama faded slowly as new things replaced me as the main gossip. Someone else's meltdown, a new hire who made a mess of a project, a change in management. The company never came out and apologized for doubting me, but they started giving me bigger tasks again. The manager who had sat in that meeting with human resources started asking my opinion on things more often, like she was rebuilding some kind of quiet trust. I kept my cabin. I changed the locks again, more for my peace of mind than anything else, and upgraded the security system. I started turning my phone on airplane mode every time I drove out there. I liked the idea that people could shout into the void online, and it would not reach me for a while. The drive itself became a ritual. Leave the city, watch the buildings fade into trees, feel my shoulders drop a fraction of an inch every few miles. On some evenings, I would sit on the repaired deck with a blanket and a mug and watch the sun slide down over the water. I would listen to the wind in the trees and the occasional boat in the distance and try to remember that I was not the girl standing in the hallway with a trash bag anymore. I was a grown woman who had drawn a line and refused to let her family walk over it again. Most weekends out there looked exactly the same from the outside. I would stop for cheap groceries on the way in, cross a few small repairs off a handwritten list, and then let the quiet do the rest. I played music off my phone until the battery dropped too low, ate simple food I could make on a hot plate, and went to bed tired in a way that felt clean instead of humiliating. It was boring in the best possible way. Nobody was watching, nobody was scoring me, and for 2 days at a time I could exist without performing for anyone. The reality is simple and ugly and weirdly freeing. My mother cares more about how things look than how they feel, and my sister has never really learned how to live without someone cushioning her fall. They tell a version of this story where I am cold and selfish and dramatic, and I tell a version where I finally stopped setting myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. Both can exist in the world at the same time, but only one of them lets me sleep at night. There was one last attempt from my mother to pull me back in before things settled into this uneasy silence. It happened a few months after the court hearing when the weather was starting to warm up again. I was at the cabin, cleaning out a closet that still smelled faintly like old paint and dust, when I heard tires on gravel. For a second, I thought it might be the neighbor, but when I peeked through the curtain, I saw my mother's car. She got out slower this time, like some of the fight had drained out of her. She did not have a folder in her hands. She did not have papers. She walked up to the porch and stood there for a moment, looking at the door like she was trying to decide whether to knock. I opened it before she could, partly because I did not want her pounding on it and acting like I was locking her out of something she owned. She asked if she could come in. I hesitated. The restraining order technically applied to my sister and her ex, not my mother, but I knew exactly what she was capable of stirring up. I let her stand just inside the doorway. I did not invite her to sit. Maybe that was petty. Maybe it was healthy. She looked around like she was seeing the cabin for the first time, even though she had seen pictures when it was just an idea. Her eyes landed on the patched deck through the window, the painted walls, the secondhand furniture that somehow looked intentional now. She made a small noise, something between a sigh and a sniff. She said she wanted to talk without yelling. She said she was tired. She said the baby was beautiful, but the situation was hard. She talked about bills, about rent, about how unfair life was to mothers who just wanted the best for their children. I listened. I leaned against the kitchen counter and crossed my arms and tried very hard not to fill in her blanks for her. Then she said the line I had been waiting for. She said, "You know, if you had just given them this place, none of this would have happened." I laughed. I could not help it. It came out sharp and surprised like a cough. I asked her if she really believed that, if she genuinely thought that someone who tried to break in once would have magically turned into a respectful tenant just because their name was on a deed. If she really thought that erasing my years of work would have fixed the part of my sister that expects other people to catch her. She did not answer that directly. She never does. She went back to talking about sacrifice, about how parents give up their dreams for their children. I pointed out that I am also her child. She waved her hand like that was a minor detail. It was always like that. My sacrifice was expected. My sister's comfort was protected. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You used to be softer." I told her I used to be softer because I still believed she would show up for me if I broke. Now I know I just hit the floor alone. We went in circles for a while. No screaming this time, just tired voices and old habits. In the end, she did not apologize. I did not either. She left with a little speech about how one day I would regret choosing things over people. I watched her car disappear down the road and felt this hollow ache in my chest. Not because I thought she was right, because I understood finally that she was never going to see me the way I needed her to. Not as a problem to manage, not as a resource to tap, but as a person. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned my forehead against the wood for a second. Then I went back to cleaning out the closet. Life keeps going even when your heart is processing something huge. There are always shelves to wipe and boxes to drag to the trash and light bulbs to replace. I used to think being a good daughter meant making myself smaller so my mother could feel like she was in control. Now I think being a good daughter to myself means taking up the space that actually belongs to me and letting the people who cannot handle it step back. So yeah, my mother can keep telling her story. My sister can keep telling hers. I am telling mine. In my own voice, with all the mess and pain and petty little details they like to erase. I am telling it from a creaky deck in front of a lake, in a state they never wanted to visit, in a house they thought they could claim but could not keep. And if that makes me the villain at the family table, so be it. I finally have a table of my own.